Joining us now to shed some light on China's actions is Representative Denver Riggleman, a Republican serving Virginia's 5th District. So, Congressman, there's been growing calls for accountability when it comes to China, including from yourself. You've co-sponsored a bill that wants to hold China accountable for its handling of this pandemic. Can you speak a little bit as to what that bill entails?
Sure, and I just want to say really quick is that the reason I know a little bit about China is because based on my background, that's what I did in the Office of Secretary of Defense. So that's why I probably am a little bit hawkish on China right now. But really, this bill is looking to hold China accountable for their actions, specifically on the coronavirus. And what they didn't do, really going forward, what they didn't do to warn everywhere in the world what was going on with them. And I've seen this before with China when I was in the Pentagon. I've seen that they're a little bit sneaky when it comes to actually informing other countries or other organizations what they're doing. And, you know, that time that it took them to do this was just ridiculous. And I think at some point we got to hold them accountable for these type of actions.
And you bring up the timing there, and I think that's very important because the difference of 1 week in this pandemic, we've seen the curve as they keep showing us on TV over and over again. The difference between 1 week is the difference between thousands and tens of thousands of cases. So now we see that if there were delayed information coming from China, delayed to the World Health Organization, that the United States acted on, that could have quite literally resulted in American deaths. So I think you're right on to say that there needs to be some accountability when it comes to this action, especially if there was some blurring of the truth coming out of China and then other countries acting on that information. So let me ask you, what has the response been to that bill, not only from your Republican colleagues, but those on the other side of the aisle as well?
It's been very positive on our side of the aisle. I mean, the other side of the aisle seems like they're sort of, I don't know if they're meandering their way through the Chinese fields here, trying to get some friends over there. I'm just not quite sure why they wouldn't react like we're reacting to the way the Chinese have sort of done us in this pandemic. But you think about this. I have a district that's 10,000 square miles. We're looking at right now, we're starting to see these blooms in these areas. What if we had that extra week? What if we had known what we know now about the coronavirus? What if China had come clean? I have a nursing home right now. We went from one case in one county to 60 in 16 days just because of that. And there's got to be some anger. We have to look at China being culpable for these type of actions. And again, we've looked at them as a military enemy before. We looked at them as going after our IP or intellectual property. Why can't they at least be honest about the virus that's coming out of China? And why can't we hold them accountable? And we have to look at it saying China is culpable.
And your Democratic colleagues say that when the president points the finger at someone like China, someone like the World Health Organization, he's trying to distract the blame from what's happening in the U.S. right now. But then a lot of his supporters saying that you can have those two conversations at once. I mean, even before this whole pandemic took place, China was an adversary, as you were saying, from multiple fronts. You could say from a military perspective, from a trade perspective, from an economic perspective. The middle-class worker here in America is very disenfranchised and very much so affected by the actions of China. So to say that China is in no way responsible for some of the problems that we're having in this country, I think is misplaced to say. But you've been taking steps as well to try to address this pandemic in the immediate. You wrote a letter to President Trump this morning offering some advice and services. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Oh, goodness, Alex, that's a great question. I was a military mission planner, so what I want to look at is how we can use sort of a national to regional to state look on how we combat this coronavirus, right? And we look at it on the health side, we look at it on the economic side, and how can we actually kludge this? And the way that we can do that is by utilizing data and metrics and going forward and making sure we have information sharing, but sort of an algorithmic way of looking at this. I think we can open sectors of the economy slowly as those regions are cleaner. We have testing. We know how many people in each county have this, and we know what the procedures are to actually protect them. Why can't we use data and metrics to do this? And I'm pretty excited about it.
I think that's a very interesting way to go about things when you can get actual statistics and act on those statistics. It's an interesting time that we're living in with new technology and things of that sort, so it only makes sense to take advantage of those technologies. But that also brings me to another problem that I want to talk about as well, is the idea of Chinese misinformation. We heard about Russia, for example, in the 2016 election, spreading misinformation throughout the country, and it made headlines for 2-3 years. And now we see that the same thing is happening with China. And we knew that it's been happening even before this coronavirus outbreak, but now we see it being ramped up right now, spreading propaganda here inside the United States. How widespread, based on your experience that you were talking about before, how widespread is those misinformation campaigns?
China's good at this. We know this for a fact. You know, when I worked in critical infrastructure and cyber, I was more on the offensive end, but we looked at how they could really penetrate our infrastructure and penetrate our networks in a very simple way. I think what we're looking at right now is they're using that same kind of misinformation. A lot of people know what China does in their own country with controlling the internet and with information warfare. We cannot allow that to happen here, and that's why you see this sort of strong reaction from Republicans specifically, especially those in the defense sector like myself, who's been dealing with China way too long, right? And we know what they're capable of. And we also know that if we don't react to this, they're going to do whatever they want to do. And I feel like they seem to, I really do feel like they seem to think that they have sort of leeway in the American marketplace. I don't think we should allow that anymore.
I mean, there's no doubt. We were talking before about how Democrats claim that President Trump is trying to deflect some of the blame when it comes to this issue. That's what China is trying to do with the rest of the world right now, is control the narrative. And it seems like they've had that same type of messaging parroted by some of their friends and allies in the media, as well as the World Health Organization. So I think it is a problem that we need to root out early on. Otherwise, that seed eventually grows into something that you can't necessarily unplant. But Congressman Riggleman, I really appreciate you coming on tonight, breaking down all these complicated topics at a time where we really need it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. You know, facts are stubborn things, and we'll continue to find those facts.
They're a pain, but you got to face them someday. Thank you very much, Congressman.